Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim. Join hosts Dan Melnick and Qasim Masood as they explore big ideas, limitless possibilities, and engage with visionaries, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who dare to dream big, get inspired, motivated, and find practical tips for personal growth. Think big, dream bigger, and ignite your potential.
Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim, and our guest today is Jeff. So Jeff, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, tell us where you live and what you do.
Yeah, thanks, Dan, for having me. Appreciate it. My name's Jeff Haddox. I live in Fort Worth, Texas, on the southwest side of the area, and I work currently as the CTO at Omni Retail Enterprises. So we're a parent company for several direct-to-consumer brands.
Awesome. So obviously you've been in the D2C space for some time. So I'm curious more about your background and kind of how you got into it, and also even how you kind of, worked your way up to be the CTO of a company.
Yeah, I mean, I'll look to you to keep me on the rails so I don't just talk, but I fell into it. I didn't mean to. It just kind of happened. And I think in the retail space, that's a pretty common theme sometimes. But, I started as an analyst in the banking world, oddly enough, and really understanding consumer data, really trying to make ends meet with how the marketing aspects that we were utilizing and how that impacted the customer and the outcomes we wanted in the business. And honestly, in the banking industry at that time, things were slow and boring. So I just kind of got bored. I got a great tie collection working at a bank as an analyst. It just wasn't the most exciting thing, but I had an opportunity come up in the retail vertical that allowed me to use some of those same customer and analytic skills that I had been developing. And it happened to be at a company called Pier 1 Imports, which is, I spent a lot of time, that organization and that business. But that really was the springboard to give me a good understanding of how we leverage data at a customer level to influence the outcomes, how we talk to the customer, when and where we talk to the customer, what do we talk to the customer about from a product and assortment standpoint. And, that just kept led to one thing to another. Behavioral analytics became a really key component that just honestly, this will date me, but that was really in the early 2000s when we were just starting to grasp the power of behavioral data on a website and how to start to leverage that to drive, again, the outcomes that we wanted in that given session or that visit. All of that over time just led to Pier 1 at the time was not in a direct-to-consumer business. They did not have an e-commerce component. And it was one of my favorite stories. The CEO comes by my office one day and he's looking at some of the reporting that I was doing from a digital marketing perspective and a behavioral standpoint. And he's like, Jeff, I don't understand. Why do you have so many sessions on the website when you're spending almost nothing? We should do something with these. I'm like, yeah, actually, I think that's a great idea. He's like, do you think we should think about e-commerce? And I'm like, yes, the customer wants it. So that was the bridge, if you will, that said, okay, let's really start to think about e-commerce for this brand. And I had never done that before. I knew enough about digital marketing and the web components, but never really direct to consumer and how a P&L all comes together and how you leverage all of that and make it a profitable business, not just selling things online. And that was the springboard that said, okay, let's take you out of marketing. Let's create a new group, which we did, called business development. And I happen to be like that marketing SME, and a small group of us rebuilt e-commerce from the ground up, not just the website, but integration across the entire organization, a 50-year-old organization, financials, logistics, even to the 1,000 stores that we had, rebuilt how e-commerce should work and work in a unified manner and launched that business. And that was some of the most exciting times in my career. And I couldn't have planned that. It just kind of fell into it, to come back to your original question.
That's awesome. No, and it's interesting because like Pier 1 obviously does not have the retail store, but they still have an e-commerce presence. So you kind of launch what is today their main business.
Yeah, so I mean, you're right. So what at the time, Pier 1 was almost a $2 billion organization, all done through physical stores. And we brought digital to the forefront, call it digital transformation. And to your point, when I left in 2019, we had been at it about 7 years, and our P&L we were generating $500 million in top line. It was a third of the company's business at that point. So you're right. The ability to really pour into an organization and grow a new sales channel for it was pretty exciting.
For sure. And I guess obviously they've been doing it for some time. and trends are always changing and there's always different opportunities. So I guess like as of now, right in 2025, like what are some of the biggest trends and change that you're seeing across the e-commerce landscape?
Yeah, I mean, two things that stand out as you ask that question. It's simplicity. The tech stack that we used to have to deal with and integrate with is almost non-existent if you just have a simple direct-to-consumer business. As an example, when we built PeerOne.com years ago, back as we were relaunching e-commerce, it took us a solid 8 to 12 months to really stand up that website and everything that went into that. I think we all know we could stand up a website in an hour, maybe tops, if we wanted to today. That would have payment integration and fulfillment, like name it. So the barrier of entry into the direct-to-consumer space has dramatically changed, just based upon some of the players in the space. So that's a big one for sure. I think the other thing that's changed is everyone talks about AI, but I'll be really specific with AI here. So generative AI really has the opportunity, if leveraged appropriate, to change the way we have communication with our customers. And I honestly don't think anyone's doing it at the level yet, because it's still relatively fresh. But over the years, many, many years as a marketer, we've talked about personalized communications, whether it's one-to-many or one-to-one. With the amount of data that we can now collect at browse level, that behavioral data coupled with any other data that we have, transactional or otherwise, and leverage that in a near real-time view to give a customer a very personalized experience using generative AI is really, we're on the brink of that. That's what I think is really, really interesting in the retail space today.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I think simplicity is super important that you brought up a good point. And I guess like on that note, right, especially in ecom, like I think there's so many, so many different kinds of tests that happen, right? Especially when you're looking at CRO, even being like the CTO, there's like a lot of people are doing lots of A/B testing and things like that. And that's something that you guys, incorporate, or how do you kind of, when it comes to your digital presence, like understand, which website, which landing page, like what works the best when it comes to the marketing and sales aspect of the business?
Yeah, there's no silver bullet here, right? So leveraging conversion rate optimization, so CRO, is really helpful because we certainly leverage that to give us some insight into where we could be better or change. But the challenge with that is it's always a snapshot in time, right? So what works today may not work tomorrow, or what worked for Jeff may not work for Dan. So it is the rule of averages that get us in trouble at times. But nonetheless, without having a robust platform to do some multivariate testing and some of the personalization we just talked about, those are the tools that we still use in our toolkit. And they're not bad. So I'm not, putting them in a negative light. Like, they're helpful to begin to optimize and learn from, but there's always those outliers that we are not paying attention to when we optimize in that regard. Similarly, from a marketing perspective, continuing to push the boundaries as much as we can on profitability and efficiency. So every marketer you talk to is going to talk about ROAS, return on ad spend, which I think is an important element in the equation, but we've really leaned our marketing into looking at contribution margin. So using ROAS as a real-time proxy for that contribution margin, but knowing how that flows all the way through. So we're not just driving a positive ROAS of, it can range, of course, depending on the campaign, but we want to ensure that marketing spend is generating EBITDA dollars, is profitable, right? So it's taking it down and thinking about the cost of goods sold. It's thinking about the fulfillment costs associated with that, as well as the marketing spend. So that's where we've tried to get a little bit more granular in how we optimize our marketing campaigns.
For sure. And then in terms of like tech stack, I mean, obviously there's so many different tech tools that you use, but are there certain platforms that you've worked with more that you think are more efficient, especially for, if you're talking about, I'm sure it varies depending on the products and the scale of the brands, and, just in your career, like what have you kind of worked with that you've seen, has been like the most beneficial?
Yeah, I can't say I've worked with them all, but I've worked with enough of them, right? So just if I pick on e-commerce platforms for just a moment, I've worked on Magento, I've worked on Shopify, I've worked on WordPress, I've worked on Salesforce Commerce Cloud. All have really good pieces to their business and all have things you just want to kind of punch in the face every day. So there's no perfect solution out there. Let's just be honest. So for me, it's about finding the one that gives you back to simplicity, that gives you the simplest path forward to achieve your business goals without having to put a lot of capital into it and just spend money to try and get it to do what you want. And, I'm hesitant to say names, but I will here. As much as I think we may have a hate relationship with some e-commerce platforms because of the cost structure and things that come along with them, I've yet to see a platform that gives you the simplicity and flexibility that you would need that outside of Shopify. It really is, it is not an enterprise level solution. So you wouldn't want to do, hundreds of millions of dollars on it, or certainly in the billion range. But for, those kind of small and mid-level retailers that need to stand up something quickly and get things moving, it's a great solution.
Yeah, I think also in terms of data, like earlier you were talking about data. I mean, Shopify has a very intuitive dashboard, really good data, especially if you're doing meta ads, things like that. It's really important to be able to make sure that you track everything from end to end, right? When you have like a platform that, as you said, right, is super simple and has that good data, it makes it much easier for a marketer to actually, use that platform and get good results.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think back to like just rewind 10 years ago in the direct to consumer space, we had teams of people who made sure that our data was flowing and integrated so that marketing had what they needed to understand the impact they were having on the business and the customer. And again, Shopify simplifies that, and even to the point where Shopify's POS system, again, like cost aside and how that's structured, it makes it very easy to understand the relationship between online and offline transactions using their tool.
Exactly. And then, obviously in the US, right, there's still lots of opportunities. I think I saw a stat, it was like in 24, only 15% of transactions in retail were like on e-commerce, right? And like in the UK, you have 30%, China is 50% plus. So there's still a lot of opportunities. So, as we kind of grow and continue to see more growth in e-commerce, like in terms of trends, right? It's like you mentioned personalization, but do you see more things like social commerce like they have in China, with TikTok happening, or other trends like that, where ways to encourage Americans to actually spend more money online as opposed to in physical retail?
Yeah, I think there's a line here, right? So like my goal, even though I work in a direct to consumer space, my goal is not like, hey, let's have 100% of our transactions online. Like there is an experiential component to shopping that is so important in our economy. And I wouldn't want to take that away, right? And nor would the customer let us, right? So that they would vote appropriately. The way I think about it is, how do we leverage digital and the attribution components that come with that to create those rich experiences, whether that's online or offline and everything in between? And so, some of the basic things, and that goes beyond like having, a BOPIS, that buy online, pick up in store, although that's important, but really the connective tissue that allows a consumer to start their journey online and learn and think about, depending on the category, the consideration time that would come with that. So, furniture, very different than, some other small widget, right? But really thinking through it that way, like that journey and the ecosystem that facilitates that journey is what we still kind of are missing, right? I mean, to give an example, don't let me ramble too much here, Dan, but to give you an example of like grocery had really been a laggard and slow to take to the e-commerce space. And, COVID was a catalyst that forced them to do a lot of that. But even post-COVID, while like think about the Walmarts of the world, the Targets, and even, some of the other independent retailers, independent grocery chains, they all have a lot of delivery and pickup in store options, but the vast majority of their business still takes place at POS. So the consumer has this desire to go touch their produce, right? They want to pick out the right banana, that's okay. That's their prerogative. So I think that's the challenge. Like, how do we create digital tools that help the consumer be more efficient or have more of an enjoyable time in their kind of physical approach to retail?
Yeah, I think, I mean, that's a good point. Like, for example, like I shop a lot at like Target, and they're pretty good with technology because, obviously there you can pick things up, in the parking lot, but you can also like use the app. And I think Walmart has like something similar where you can just use the app and figure out like where in the store is your product. You can go find it. Okay, let me go take a look because it's like actually, what I want. And I think things like that kind of working in sync are super helpful in
Yeah.
2025.
Yeah, agree. So, I mean, Home Depot is a kind of a massive retailer, of course. They've leveraged in their app like the geolocation component. So they geofence you, and they when you're in a store, you get a slightly different experience. Walmart does the same if you have their app. And it really is about helping you navigate the store, because the reality is those stores are so big, they don't have the people there to help you find, nor do they, I mean, just frankly, nor do they pay their people the right skill. They don't have the right skill level in the store to help you navigate. So they've started to bridge that gap for sure. I think they probably both do a poor job actually marketing that or communicating that to the consumer to know the value that's in the palm of their hand. But those are great, like, nudges along that way. The thing I would add, that especially working in an omni retailer that I have in the past, the guiding principle that I always used when we were building out digital pieces was, how do we emulate the store experience? Right. So I'm using Pier 1 as an example again. But we talked about often in store, our associates were really home decor enthusiasts. They weren't designers, right? They didn't have that skill set, but they were passionate about helping the customer create a look that was really unique in their own. And they did so by recommending products and showcasing how this would look together, literally clearing a table so they could set product together and say, this is how this all looks together. So that was our guiding principle. Like, let's emulate what's so rich about the store experience. How do we bring that to life in the digital sphere? And, we had challenges with that, and it was never perfect, but that was really how we thought about it, was don't do digital for the sake of digital. Let's do digital that emulates something that we know is really fabulous.
For sure. So obviously, we're still in Q1, so in terms of, your day-to-day CTO, Omni Retail, what are some of your biggest goals and objectives for the rest of 2025?
Yeah, for us, so a little bit of context. The role that I'm in, the organizations that the brands that we have under our parent company umbrella, they're really in a state of cleanup. So they haven't been managed perfectly over the last few years. So we're really trying to clean things up and simplify everything that we have so that we can scale quickly. And I know that's really broad, and we talked about simplicity earlier. So I'll give you a real example. One of the brands that we have in our portfolio has the proprietary app. And it's not just a turnkey app like a tap card app or something. It's way richer than just shopping. It's actually bodybuilding.com. And bodybuilding.com has a robust app that allows consumers to work out, to track their workouts. It actually has an internal social component. So like-minded health enthusiasts and bodybuilders can communicate and share their progress. And then it also has a shopping component to it. That tool has a unified login that runs across that platform, but also integrates with our website. And what's happened over the last few years is we've kind of let the infrastructure that supports that just go really just unmaintained. So it's been Frankensteined a little bit together. So the work that we're doing really over the first half of this year is, how do we simplify that? Let's create some efficiencies there, both from a cost and for the user as well, so that as we are investing and growing that customer base this year, we can ensure that we can, one, manage the costs associated with it, but two, give our customers just really the best experience as possible. So that's, as boring as that is, it's simple. Back to simplicity. That's the path that we've been on.
That's awesome. And so obviously you've been in e-commerce and retail for a long time. So if you could go back to before you started your career, what is the one biggest piece of advice that you wish you knew?
Oh, well, it has nothing to do with digital e-commerce or any even commerce for that thing. The thing that's most important, and I think I teach as an adjunct professor at the University of North Texas, so I tell my students this all the time: relationships are important. And I'll give you a little example. I remember sitting in a marketing class in my undergraduate program, and the professor said, you need to learn to play golf because business happens on a golf course. And I was like, man, I hate golf. What? Are you kidding me? And I missed the whole essence of what he was saying. But the essence of what he was saying is relationships are important. They don't always happen in a conference room, your transaction. It's important to maintain those relationships with people, people you work with, people on your team, your vendors, your partners, and treat them as people first and foremost. And that takes your ability to do business very, very far. So that's the thing I would, if I knew that 20 years ago and understood the importance of relationships, I would have approached people much differently than I have in the last few years.
For sure. Yeah, that's really good advice. So if somebody watching this wanted to reach out to you or to get in touch, what's the best way for somebody to get in contact?
Yeah, LinkedIn is the best place. You can always ping me there. I have my personal website. You can always go look there. It's just jeffhaddocks.com, but always open to continuing the conversation. And I'm a constant learner. So if there's something that maybe one of your viewers heard today that is interesting and they want to poke more or they have ideas, I'm all ears, Dan.
Jeff, thanks so much for your time today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Of course.